After Terror of Mechagodzilla got some pretty underwhelming ticket sales, Tomoyuki Tanaka was having trouble bringing his monster back to the big screen. Yoshimitsu Bado had been planning a Godzilla vs. Hedorah sequel for some time now, and even though it was planned to release in 1976, it was eventually scrapped. Like I mentioned in my last video, in 1979 there was a story about Godzilla washing up on the beach and then getting transformed into a rocket where he would later fly into space. Just completely insane. Meanwhile, in 1978, a cartoon company named Hanna-Barbera was making an animated Godzilla TV show with the help of Toho. But they get pretty much everything about Godzilla wrong, including him shooting fire breath and lasers from his eyes. He also has a son named Godzuki, and he might just top Manila on my hate list.
Look at this dude.
As the 1980s began, story ideas for the latest Godzilla movie started to come in, and they all had the same idea of bringing Godzilla back to his original roots. One story idea included a monster named Bagan who takes different forms throughout the movie. Over the years, Bagan would float in and out of different drafts for Godzilla movies and would eventually appear in a couple of Godzilla video games. But one thing was for sure, Godzilla was making a comeback and it had to be special. The movie begins with a boat in the middle of the sea for some reason, and if you've seen a Godzilla movie before, you know the boat isn't safe. Sure enough, it is attacked by Godzilla. We are then introduced to the protagonist of the movie, Goro Maki, who begins to investigate a random boat, and if you've seen a horror movie, you know why he's doing this. Because he's stupid. Well, I was right about the sort of horror movie atmosphere because there's some very fun stuff displayed that you'll just have to see for yourself. Goro is then attacked by a very cheap-looking flying bug. The bug, named Shakirus, I'm probably butchering that name, is a different version of the Meganulon from 1956's Rodan. The sounds that Shakirus makes are taken from Kamacuras. Goro survives Shakirus and brings one of the other survivors with him. The survivor starts to explain a giant reptilian-like creature that we know very well at this point. That's right, he's talking about the Big G. Alright, I am very confused about all this. I thought that the boat that Goro and the survivor are currently on is a completely different boat from the one that Godzilla attacked. Although I was wrong, and apparently it's the same boat, but the survivor mentions a bluish ray that Godzilla shoots from his mouth, which is obviously his atomic breath. But that wouldn't make any sense, because if Godzilla shot his atomic breath at the boat, there's no way that the boat could still be intact. Goro and the survivor, okay, I'll stop calling him that, his real name's Hiroshi, are then rescued by a helicopter and brought back to Tokyo. But the government won't let anyone know of Hiroshi's return because they don't want to spread panic about Godzilla. But this doesn't stop Hiroshi's sister from finding out that her brother's alive, and soon word starts to spread about Godzilla's return. Meanwhile, we see a submarine getting attacked by some sort of giant monster, and surprise, surprise, it's Godzilla. A couple of boring scenes later, Godzilla truly appears for the first time, and it does not disappoint. My only complaint is that the size difference between the human officer and Godzilla isn't very realistic, especially since this new Godzilla is 80 meters tall instead of just 50. The roar for this new Godzilla is truly terrifying and is probably my favorite roar out of all of them. Shin Godzilla's roar sounds suspiciously like this, so I don't know if it's taken from or just inspired by the return of Godzilla, but I do know that they reused sound effects in that movie. Godzilla begins his march on Tokyo, and a nearby nuclear power plant has to evacuate. But as we see, they are too late, and the building starts to collapse on the men. Godzilla then starts to absorb the radiation from the power plant, which is really something we haven't seen before. But then Godzilla suddenly stops his rampage and starts to follow some migrating birds. If you thought 1962's Godzilla was stupid with his pea-sized brain, meet this Godzilla. First he's so clumsy that he destroys buildings when the man's just trying to feed off radiation, and now he's starting his migration with the birds. The suit actor for this new Godzilla would be Kenpachiro Satsuma, and this wouldn't be Satsuma's first time as a suit actor. He played Hedorah in 1971 and Gigan in both 1972 and 1973. Cybots were also used to portray the monster, and they're probably the most memorable part of the movie. Something interesting to note is that Americans and more people from other countries appear in some of the Japanese government meetings, which is also a first for the franchise. Godzilla soon appears in what I think is Tokyo Bay and immediately starts to get attacked by the military. But as usual, their weaponry has no effect on him, and Godzilla just keeps marching forward. There's a scene I love with complete insanity just going on everywhere, but suddenly everything goes silent and then... It really shows us how powerful this Godzilla is, and it's not too obnoxious either. The reason I'm referring to it as this Godzilla is because we're never given a very good explanation if this is the same Godzilla from 1954 or not. They could have done the same thing that Godzilla Reigns Again did and say that this is a completely different Godzilla. Or they could have done what Godzilla vs. Megaguirus did and say that Godzilla never died in 1954, which in my opinion is the smarter choice. Godzilla starts to make his way to the heart of the city, searching for radiation to feed off of. The way I see it, this Godzilla doesn't really want to destroy buildings. In fact, his main priority is absorbing more nuclear radiation. Godzilla then spots a train and begins to attack it. This is of course a reference to the 1954 original where Godzilla also attacks a train, but it's also sort of become a staple of the monster movie genre, with King Kong also doing it in his original film. The government sends an airborne weapon called the Super X to do battle with Godzilla. This super weapon is armed with cadmium missiles and even flares. If all this isn't crazy enough, a Soviet missile is accidentally launched at Japan to try and defeat Godzilla. And what's the catch? Our main characters are trapped in a building and are trying to escape before the missile can hit them. The Super X is victorious when the cadmium missiles they fired at Godzilla temporarily put him to sleep, until Godzilla wakes up and drops a building on it. Well, if you thought there would be much more about that Soviet missile, then you're wrong, because the government easily shoots it down before it can reach Tokyo. After this, Godzilla continues his raid on Tokyo, but the government remembers how Godzilla followed those birds earlier, so they somehow lead him to a volcano. The Return of Godzilla was released on December 15th, 1984 and was decently successful in Japan. 1 year later in America, the film was heavily re-edited and dubbed with extra scenes by Raymond Burr, who was in Godzilla King of the Monsters in 1956. But Tomoyuki Tanaka had succeeded at bringing his monster back to the big screen. Next, we dive into 1989's Godzilla vs. Biollante.